Now we're going to dig into the troubleshooting section. What we're going to do is just go through some of the really common problems that Coralogix customers experience and hopefully answer some of the questions that you've got and help you to preempt some of the problems that you might run into when you're using the alerting feature here in Coralogix. So the first one is really straightforward. When you're defining a new alarm, it takes about 15 minutes for that alarm to become embedded into the platform. So if you do define an alarm, wait 15 minutes, go get a coffee or something, wait 15 minutes, and then have a look and see if it's triggering, because that will mean that it's definitely active. And that's just something to be aware of. Alarms don't work instantly as soon as you define them, but it's only 15 minutes, and at which point they will begin to work normally, roughly 15 minutes anyway. The next thing is about how you define your alarms. A really common problem that customers have is they define a query in here, like they'll say, I don't know, so I want to zoom in on a namespace, for example, and then, so I've got my Kubernetes namespace here, and then they will pick an application and a subsystem that does not fit in that namespace. And essentially their query and their application and subsystem filters, or their severity subsystem filters, they're not working together and you end up with no data. So it's really, really important to make sure that firstly you check your query. You can take this for logs, for example, you can take this and you can go to the explore screen and you can place the log in here. And you can just make sure that you actually have data available. So that's a nice way of just verifying that your data is working as expected. Otherwise, you may find that your alerts aren't really working in the way that you intended, and that's because your alarms and your filters are working against one another. The next common problem that people have is around the less than use case. So there are some nuances here that we need to be aware of. The first is that let's say I want to know about 100 occurrences, less than 100 occurrences in 1 hour. Now, before we said that at the start, we said that it takes 15 minutes for an alert to become active. This is true, but for a less than use case, the alert won't fire until the initial time window has passed. So you've said an hour, it will be an hour at least before this time window passed. And this makes sense because you want to check that less than 100 occurrences have happened within an hour. So an hour has to pass in order to be certain that less than 100 occurrences have happened. For example, you could have 90 occurrences, or you could have 0 occurrences right up until the 59th minute, and then 200 occurrences could happen in the last minute. So you have to wait for the initial time window to pass. The other thing to be aware of with the less than log queries, less than for log queries and for metrics as well, is that when you're defining your notification time window here, so your notify every or notification group, so the number of times that you should fire for an alarm or check the alert and fire a new alarm if it's still true, should be basically be the same as your notification group. So for example, if you set this to an hour, you'll notice that it automatically changes to an hour. And again, this kind of makes sense. You don't want to check every 5 minutes that there's been less than 100 occurrences in an hour, because you're going to be constantly reviewing the same data and over again. So when you're setting the time window, it needs to be the same as the notify every window. It won't let you create the alerts if they're different. So that's just something to be aware of. That's the reason why you're not seeing that. For the more than usual type, be aware that it takes a week for the alarm type to process and profile all your data from initial creation, so it won't be active for a week. But once it is active, the reason for this is to prevent false positives, by the way. If we start triggering an alarm too soon, it might not know enough information to make an accurate assessment. So that profiling has to happen first. And we mentioned this before, but I'll just mention it again. If you have an application that produces like sporadic logs, you're just like a few logs 1 minute and then nothing for 5 hours and some more logs, it won't work that well with the more than usual alert type. It's much better with an application that's producing lots and lots of logs all the time, constantly. So that's just something to be aware of when you're defining the more than usual alert type. The next problem that people sometimes face is adding labels. So I'll select a label here, SLO. Now, when I close this off, I have two options: clear and delete permanently. Clear means remove this label from this alert. Delete permanently means delete this label from all alerts, okay? This is a big one, and you'll notice a second prompt comes up to make sure you're completely aware of this. Do you want to delete this label from all alerts? Be aware of that, okay? Because if you delete it from all of the alerts, there's no undoing that. So you have to go back and add that label to all of the appropriate alerts. So just be aware of that and make sure that you don't make that mistake of undoing some of your hard work there. The next thing we're going to dig into, so while we were discussing the metrics alert type, we already discussed undetected values. If you missed that, go back and check that. Really, really important that you understand how undetected values works, and that you understand that there's one extra nuance there that I will add. If you have a grouping in your undetected value, a grouping in your PromQL alert, so for example, like this, now undetected alerts will be grouped by continent. Okay, they will be grouped by continent. They won't be, if you get rid of the grouping, then you essentially, if any permutation of labels on load time, this load time label has like a permutation of labels is like a unique combination of values for all of the different labels attached to that metric. So if one of those combinations stops sending data, that counts as one undetected value. Remember, this is for the less than query as well. However, if you do an aggregation, for example, sum load time by continent, now we're saying, okay, if that continent stops sending data, then that counts as one undetected value. So be aware that the group by will change how undetected values are picked up. And so no grouping, you essentially have, you're tracking every single possible permutation of the labels on a given metric. With some grouping, it's on the grouping key. So in this case, content, it could be whatever the label is on the metric that's most appropriate for you. So that was some of the really obvious ones that we've just kind of gone through. Remember that if at any point you're feeling like this, you don't really understand what's going on, this button down here is super useful. Click this. This will take you to support. So you can send a message. We will reply very, very quickly. Our support is excellent, and they'll be able to help you with whatever the feature is that you're trying to understand. But just remember that if you're ever stuck or you see an issue that hasn't been covered in this video, feel free to just drop a message in there, and someone from the customer success team will make sure that you completely understand that. There's one other thing I'm going to add, which is the ratio alert. So get rid of that. So what the ratio alert does is essentially you define two queries. This is a log type alert, by the way. You define two queries. So for example, I'm going to say, let's just assume I'm all error logs. Okay, nice and easy. And query 2 is all info logs. Now, let's say I've got 1,000 error logs and 10,000 info logs. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin these around. It makes it a bit more easy. What I'm essentially saying there is I've got 10,000 info logs and I've got 1,000 error logs. What that means is that you're going to take 10,000 and divide it by 1,000. It's going to get you 10. Okay, that's going to get you your ratio. So for every one error log, there are 10 info logs. Okay, if you spin that around and you do error log first and then info, you're going to get a percentage because it's going to be 1,000 divided by 10,000. That's going to get you to 0.01. So the idea is that the ratio is the count of the first query divided by the count of the second query. Okay. Really, really powerful for detecting things like error rates when the data is available in logs rather than in metrics and things like that. So it's just something to be aware of, just to make sure that you understand that. So that's the troubleshooting section. Hopefully you don't have to spend too much time in this section because you're having a really easy time with the alarms. But once again, if you are having trouble with any aspect of alerting, just go down here, check this out, and speak to one of our customer success teams. They'll be able to help you with any problems that you have.